Well, hello everybody, this is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to your critique of the week. It's Friday, January 10th. Thanks so much for joining me. Sorry for the slow load. Facebook was asking for a new stream key, so I had to do that as we were going live. But we are here. I'm a little tired, had a very late night. A flight back from Texas last night was diverted from Ontario to LAX because of the winds, and I had to go from there to here and all sorts of stuff. So we'll see how that goes. But it's great to see everybody. Always so fun to do these critiques of the weeks. Let's see. Who do we have here? We have a whole bunch of people. Already 20 likes. That's really good. Thanks, everybody, for liking it so fast. If you haven't liked, do click like, but that's a good number to start. Jerry Stephenson's here. Morgan Feeney. Lynn Schilling. Patty Arbor's here. Brian O'Sullivan. Hey, Brian. Tina Dennettclaw. Winston Munn's here. Dee Coleman. Janice Holmes. Tara Meslick McMahon. Laura Flanagan, Jamie Thomas, Ali Rowland, Katie Dozier, hey Katie, Sharon Ferrante's here, Shape of Soup, hello, Rebecca Kate, Tom Barlow, Amy Dower Solorzano, Nancy Sabanik is here, Sharon Ferrante, good to see you Sharon, it's been a bit, Hemet Malik is here, okay, Monica Dobos, Paul Bolt, yeah, we got a great crew, Mary Anna Dunn, Lisa Seidenberg's here, alright. And anybody over on Facebook yet? Nobody yet on Facebook. Facebook is just they don't do the video like they used to. They like their reels or whatever after the fact. But anyway, this is the critique of the week. Thanks everybody for being here. What we're gonna do is what we always do, which is look at some poems, talk about what works and what doesn't. All your feedback is really helpful to everybody. You know, both the entire group, because everybody hears what everybody thinks about poems, and the poets themselves especially, because it's really hard to get that honest feedback about what's working and how are poems actually effective. That's what we always talk about every Friday afternoon here on the Critique of the Week. And let's see. Okay, so I'm going to change a little bit of the way I just pick the poems. And I used to have like pre-notification for people, and I would only do that for people that we're going to be that we knew and were moving up to the front of the line. I'm going to pick a person to start the show, and then we'll go after that to the oldest poems in the queue. And I think that that's a good way. So if you're a name I recognize, a regular contributor to the Critique of the Week and the Rattlecast and stuff, we'll move you up first and have you at the start of a show, maybe talk more about your poems. And then in the second, sort of after that, we'll go through the oldest poems in the queue. So I think every episode is going to be the same from now on, in the same format. You know, I think we're going to try to keep doing that. And I saw when I was looking at the submission queue, none other than Jamie Thomas submitted a poem last week. Just on the 3rd, so just exactly a week ago, a pair of poems, I should say. And so that's gonna be, if you're participating here, that means that you can just submit poems and we'll get to it right away instead of having to wait. I think it's a better way to do it than even the month I was making people wait sometimes recently. So I think we're gonna start doing it like that from now on. I think it's a good format. And as always, leave as many comments as you can. Now Jamie is from Ohio, and Jamie had a couple questions. And so we can keep this in mind as we read these two poems. So I'll just talk about the first one first. Poem number 1. This is a good representative example of my work when it's not a personal story, but rather just something I'm interested in and want to share. Does it do enough to be interesting to other people, or is it just a big whoop, who cares? So that's always the key question, really, and what we're trying to find out. So let's take a look at this poem. The first one from Jamie Thomas is the following. And let me get a good size. There we go. All right, there we go. So this is of the light within earshot at the gas station snack bar. So already the title is interesting. It pulls me in, starts setting the scene. All of the light within earshot, and that's an interesting concept too. But we know we're at the gas station snack bar too, so that sets the poem up really well. We have an idea of what we're going to be talking about here. Let's read it. Our oldest light goes by the name Cosmic Microwave Background Radiation, CMB for short. She's everywhere. Fluorescent bird song of modern offices, buzz of corner store ice cream cases. Have you heard of her? This chick was born screaming into freedom from the expansion of a bang so big we're still talking about it. expelled from the recombination's genderless cervix, before there were names for things like body or heat or quiet. She slid through the pitch of first dark, not yet sure what edges were, dragging the weight of a beginning behind, shelter for and shedding of photons, loosened from a fire she didn't start. Somewhere in this 13 billion year drift, her lips kissed the eyelids of stars that hadn't yet learned to die, past the chubby fists of planets still cooling in their cribs. Fell into gravity wells, bent her spine around a gape of black holes, and climbed back up again, tired but full. We call her background now like she's an afterthought, the hum of hums beneath the humming. We call her it. Add a T to that beginning, and we might as well call her mother. Then, when she reaches us frail and stretched thin, we catch her in our instruments, where we found her with desperate outstretched hands, and for our effort, like a genie giving rub for rub, she tells the story of our origin from a certain point, then distracts us with tricks when we ask her about the end. That's the first poem, and I do think the topic is interesting. I felt like the poem about, I think the third stanza, or was it the fourth? It started to get, I think these two stanzas, I started to drift a little bit, and I think these would be condensed up and shorter. But otherwise, I like the personification and the details that are shared. I always wonder, because I do like to read a lot of science, I wonder how much, average, typical readers, how much they know. Like, what does everybody know? The cosmic background radiation, what that is, and all the details around it. That map that you can see the structure of the universe, really, from the cosmic microwave background radiation. Do people know that, or is our details? It's always a fine line how much you want to reveal and like what your audience is, how much they already know, because you don't want to go on and on about things people already know about. But if they don't know about it, you want to explain and introduce it, and it's all interesting. So it's hard to judge. That's one of the things that. People say poetry is subjective, and it's subjective in some ways, and it's objective in other ways. And that's one of the main subjectivity aspects is how familiar your audience is going to be with the subject matter. And this is one of the ones, since I know if it's like about baseball or sciencey things, I know I read a lot in those domains, so I'm always wondering how much other people know. It's really hard to know that. But anyway, so those are some general thoughts. Yeah, Jimmy Papa says, quick comment, I think poets tend to use black holes too often. Yeah, well, I mean, black holes are interesting. Yeah, so Divine Starling says, lovely sing-song rhythm. I also drifted in the third stanza. Yeah, that's the part I feel like it, Winston Munn says it's a tad too long. Some really great lines. The T bit is a stretch, LOL. It takes me out some. Yeah. Okay, so that's kind of the feel I'm having too. Yeah. Yeah, Elder Friedman says, so full of sensory images. Yeah, so Tom Barlow says, I wouldn't enjam the name of the light early in the poem. Yeah, there's some enjambment that you hear me. If you go back and listen to how I read, I'm used to reading cold poems that I haven't read before. And if I'm tripping over things, it's either because I'm tired because I only slept 3 hours last night, or it's because the line breaks didn't make it easy to read. And one of the purposes of line breaks is to help the poem along, have the right energy and momentum, and have the breaks be in places where there would be pauses, both physical pauses of breath and psychological pauses in your mind too. And so if you're sort of tripping a lot through the poem reading it, sometimes it's just the line breaks. And there are a few, I'll point them out as we go through in more detail, but that's one of the things I thought about too. Let's see. Yeah, so Lisa Seidenberg says, why a line break at a genderless cervix? And you notice I tripped over, I misread cervix too, because, and that was really the trip over the genderless that made me say that wrong. Like you just sort of there's like a traffic jam in your brain sometimes if you don't have the rhythms of the line breaks right, or other punctuation, things like that. And so there's an example of that if you go back and listen to how I read. Yeah, okay, so let's look at, Let's look at what's working and what's not. So here, Chelsea McClellan says, I appreciated the introduction to CMB as our oldest light, not knowing anything about it. I think that's good enough for me since it's the important part at the end. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, Dick Westerhammer says it's a challenge in writing science-based poem to avoid too many Latinate technical words. They are also unpoetic and abstract. That's a good point too. Okay, so let's read the poem in more detail and take a look. Now, of the light with an earshot at the gas station snack bar. So one of the things somebody pointed out the period at the end and the I'm not sure about either, and the lack of capitalization. Like, it feels like a sentence, but it's not a complete sentence. It feels like it maybe should have an ellipsis here. I'm a little bit confused about those details. I'm not sure why it's of and not like all the light with an earshot, and then you don't need, I don't know, it doesn't read in as a sentence. So it's a little bit strange just the way it's formatted. But the idea of light within an earshot, like we said, is interesting. We're situated at a gas station snack bar, so that's good too. But I maybe reformat that, like say all the light or just the light, unless I'm not understanding it right. But it's a little odd. Okay, our oldest light goes by the name cosmic background radiation, CMB for short. And so I think this is actually the weakest part of the poem, maybe, is this first little bit. We had somebody already mentioned breaking at cosmic microwave background radiation. That's a lot of Dick said a lot of science, Latinate type words. It's a mouthful to read, and maybe one of the things you can do if you have a sort of those scientific words piling up that loses some of the music of the poem. That's a good thing to do in the title. The title is a good function here, and I don't know if I'd suggest this in this case for sure. But if you have a lot of sciencey jargon type words that are hard to say and don't have the music, if you put that in the title, that's like a separate spot, and so it's not part of the utterance of the poem. It doesn't break up the music. So I think that's one of the things you might consider. But to introduce this, it's a difficult just thing to introduce because it is such a clunky long name. And then saying CMB for short has the register really drops into that, informal language too. But then if you said cosmic microwave background radiation in parentheses CMB, then the whole thing just feels so technical. So I'm not sure. I wonder, cutting this and then maybe say she's everywhere, the CMB, like just trying to introduce it a little bit, getting that out right in front. It makes a difficult entry into the poem. Yeah. But anyway, so you could start she's everywhere and move that up. Fluorescent bird song of modern offices. And I like these descriptions. These are great. Fluorescent bird song of modern offices, buzz of the corner store, ice cream cases. Have you heard of her? I think maybe what you can do, I think maybe you could say, she's everywhere CMB, and then say, have you heard of her cosmic microwave background radiation there? It's just such a mouthful, though. I don't know. Yeah. Yeah. And Nancy Sevanek says, maybe just drop the CMB. My problem is that saying the name is so long, it's so clunky to say, even anywhere in a poem. It's a difficult thing to have to do. But anyway, that's a place to work on. We'll keep going. Buzz of the corner store ice cream cases. Have you heard of her? This chick was born screaming into freedom from the expansion. I love that, born screaming into freedom. That's really interesting. The personification is working really well to make the sort of the dryness of that science. Even though it's interesting to talk about black holes, Jimmy Pappas mentioned there are a lot of poems about black holes. It is a sort of so abstract, even though it's like really part of the universe, that it feels kind of unconcrete. And so having the personification of this sort of enlivens it in a nice way. This chick was born screaming into freedom from the expansion of a bang so big we're still talking about it. I like that idea too. It's one of the best lines there, I think. So, a bang so big we're still talking about it. Expelled from the recombinations, genderless cervix. And so there, recombination's a clunky kind of word. It's too sciencey, and then the break there makes it really hard to get through there. And so, maybe just the line break after, before gender would make it read a little more smoothly. Oh, Winston Moon has a good idea. So let's see. So if you To put cosmic, it's just hard to say. Cosmic background radiation, or cosmic microwave background radiation. Put it as an epigraph. And yeah, that pulls it out of the poem and makes you not have to say it. Yeah, Shave of Soup says they like the break of genderless cervix. I think it adds nice emphasis. I just completely disagree. I think it breaks up the poem. There's no other examples of that. It's not the kind of poem where that fits. It's a kind of poem where, because of the, have you heard of her? There's a casual nature of the voice. That's the kind of tone that's going on. Just, saying this chick was born screaming into freedom. That's not that's the kind of voice where you're playing it with that expectation. I think there's, throwing in the kitchen sink of things like, oh, this is a good break here because it adds emphasis. You have to, there's a holistic thing that's going on in the poem. You have to remember that. So if it's a poem that's doing all that, like, for example, I'll pull up a poem. Let's see, it's called, what is it called? What is the title? How can I look this up? It's not the, oh yeah, it's Homeboy Nomad. That's the poem I'm looking for. So, here's a poem where this works. It's Stephen Kessler's Homeboy Nomad from like Rattle, I don't know. Where is it? Winter 2005, Rattle 24. So way back when. But see, this is the kind of poem where you have that. Feel the difference in this voice versus the other voice. And sorry for that. I think there's gonna be some swearing here, so cover your kids' ears. Homeboy Nomad. Sometimes I feel like a motherless tongue, an untongue-tied motherfucker, unable to lick the button of my love merely monolingually, but must multiply my moves to include all. See how this is like playing with language the whole time? And you want the focus on the language in a poem like this where it's doing it the whole time. Like, that's the style of poem that's going on. You can find the rest of the poem here. I mean, there's other poems that we could use examples too. There's one by Marcella Sulak, who does the same kind of play that I'm thinking of too. So you can find poems where that works, and having a lot of those breaks, and you're tripping up and moving, and that's part of the rhythm and energy of the poem. But this is not the poem that we're talking about here. This is a casual aside. I'm discussing. I'm confiding in you type voice. So yeah. So anyway, so I disagree with that. I think you want to have a fluid, natural type voice in a poem like this because that's what it's doing the rest of the way through. Anyway, genderless cervix. Before there were names for things like body or heat or quiet, she slid through the pitch of first dark, not yet sure what edges were, dragging the weight of a beginning behind. Shelter for and shedding of photons loosened from her fire she didn't start. So these are the two stanzas, I think, both, me and a few other people mentioned sort of drifting, I think being too long. And I think part of the problem, it works. Let's see, expelled from recombinations, genderless cervix. That's a great image. The line break makes it tricky, and recombination's a mouthful, but it's a really cool image that you had. That's pretty original too. Before there were names, because it kind of looks like that. If you see the sort of bubble example of the Big Bang going on. Anyway, where am I? There were names for things like body or heat or quiet. And I like that before there were names for things. That's really nice too. She slid through the pitch of first dark, not sure yet what edges were. I like that too. Dragging the weight of a beginning behind. I think maybe the line stops there. And I think it maybe pushed itself too far because it gets into this shelter for and shedding of photons loosened from a fire she didn't start. And now that's a nice line by itself, but it doesn't really add a whole lot like visually to the thing you're building in your brain. And I think it just adds too many things to kind of keep track of in this image too. So I think maybe this is a line to cut and just move on. Somewhere in this 13 billion year drift, her lips kissed the eyelids of stars that hadn't yet learned to die. I like that too. Past the chubby fists of planets still cooling in their cribs. That's nice too. Fell into gravity wells, bent her spine around a gape of black holes, and climbed back up again, tired but full. I think this is another example. I think both of these two stanzas, the problems here, why we start to drift, is it goes on a little too long on the same sort of theme. Like, it's like you sort of landed a punch, now move on. It's like it's like you accomplish what you're accomplishing with these stanzas already. So just cut these last bits, I think, and then the stanzas will feel stronger for the absence. Um, yeah. We call her background now, and that's a nice, reestablishing of the casual voice too. To say we call her background now because you want to keep that going, so we know who we're where we are. Um, like she's an afterthought. The hum of hums beneath the humming. I think that's probably my favorite line in the poem. The hum of hums beneath the humming. We call her it, and that's nice too. Add a T to that beginning, and we might as well call it mother. That's interesting. A little hard. I think that it does. You have to stop and think of what you mean with that in a way that pulls you out of the poem. That's one of the things. I don't know what people feel about that one. But it is a good use of that as a transition to the mother concept of it and why personifying it as a female. Yeah, and so I think it's good. It's one of those things where you kind of have to think, there's a price to pay for like pulling people out of the poem and making them stop and think about, the actual letters like that for a second. But I think it's worth it. I think it probably pays off. Okay. Then when she reaches us, frail and stretched thin, we catch her in our instruments, where we found her, with desperate outstretched hands. I think maybe that the desperate outstretched hands don't really live up to the rest of the detail in the poem. That's something I'd sort of work on getting more interesting too. And for our effort, like a genie giving rub for rub, she tells the story of the origin from a certain point, then distracts us. I don't know. I think distracts us. I'd cut that with tricks too. And pull up this, into the line, so it's just the same sort of line length. I think that just distracts us when we ask her about the end. I think that's a better ending. Yeah. Yeah, so as Divine Starling says, a lot of great images, the poet needs to have a very sharp pen to choose which ones to edit. Yeah, that's a great summary. I think there's just a little bit too much, but I think the original question from Jamie is if the poem's interesting enough. And I think it is. I think personifying the CMB as a woman, and then the way that brings it more to life, I think is really interesting. I wonder if we could push it a little farther too. Because we don't. I think there are some great descriptions. She's everywhere. Fluorescent bird song of modern offices, the buzz, the corner store, like where she is, and that idea that it's like everywhere. Which it is, it's in your TV static and things like that. So I think you could come back to that a little bit. We kind of we go back in time to the Big Bang, and then we sort of live there, without coming back to some more visual on that. I wonder if you could, I think it'd be even stronger if you could like move a little bit of that image, in there toward the end to kind of round it out. So that's another suggestion too. But I think the poem is interesting. I think the personifying in that way makes it interesting, and I think it does, yeah. Jimmy Patappa says, do people realize the end goes back to the title? Is that how it is? So does it read as Jimmy's saying? There are no period. Maybe we didn't. Maybe I didn't notice that. So Jimmy's saying, and I think maybe this works. So the end, and that's why it starts with this. Yeah. Okay. Oh, so Jamie mentioned it earlier. That's interesting. I missed that from Jamie, but that's cool. So, and for the effort, like a genie giving rub for rub, she tells us the story of our origin from a certain point, then distracts us when we ask her about the end of the light within earshot of the gas station snack bar. And that's really cool. So that filters back to there. I've never seen a poem like that. I think I would put an ellipsis at the end here and an ellipsis at the end here. And then I think, it's almost like an Easter egg. It's going to be hard for people to notice that. But it's a cool idea to do in a poem. And I like the way that works. So, yeah. Okay. So, I think, what we said about the title, I think it's good. It's interesting to use it that way. Let's put an ellipsis there. Let's cut this sentence and just do an epigraph for cosmic microwave background radiation. And then we get the whole sort of effect. And then it's just a matter of trimming out the stuff that's like overtold and oversold. So I think that's cool. Yeah. Okay. So I think we're good on that poem. This is one of those ones that there's a lot of substance. And yeah. Yeah. Okay. So let's move on to the next one. Yeah, a lot of substance, a lot of just sort of line edits. Oh, I didn't point out the ones that we had the genderless cervix. Let me point out the other ones where the line breaks were tricky. It happened more toward she slid through the pitch of first dark, not sure what edges were, dragging the weight of a beginning behind. I think that works. It's rare that the one word then a comma works, so you don't want to just put that up there, but I think that works there. Somewhere in this, let's see, I'm trying to find without like rereading the whole poem. Yeah, fell into gravity wells. Breaking up, when you break up a noun phrase, that's like the most jarring. And it makes the reading most tricky because you're sort of ready to move on from that phrase, then you have to add back in the phrase, and so, and like I said, with the Homeboy Nomad poem we looked at, or the Men on Strike, I think is the poem by Marcella Schulach that I was thinking of. For those poems that are playing with it the whole time, it is great to do that, but for a poem that's not, it trips you up. It's like a speed bump in the poem. Anyway, other ones. Yeah. Well, anyway, I think we'll leave it there and let's look at the other one. So the other poem from Jamie, and this is interesting too. Let me read the question. So poem number 2. I love hearing stories and I love telling them. This is my attempt to enter the prose poetry conversation by the way of my first haibun. I know the haiku needs work. I've only recently begun studying, practicing them. However, I'd like to know whether the prose has merit on its own or if it needs to be a haibun to solidly plant it in the realm of poetry. Okay. And then it's questions for all, too. Where's the line between telling your story and sharing too much? What is an example of gratuitous detail and oversharing? Is anything up for grabs if it's done well poetically? Yeah, I think so. Just the general question, I think we tend to not share enough. I think I know you watch a lot, Jamie. A lot of times we talk about like the story hasn't been told here. I think there's a tendency to think we told things, both because we know the whole context, don't think we have to explain when we do, but also because we're reserved and don't want to share things all the time. And I think, a poem that overshares is pretty rare. It's hard to think of examples. I think it falls on the other side too much. When it's too much of something, it's more that it's told, like we were talking about those details, and that's a great way to think about it, where you were sort of lingering on the same idea and pushing sort of the image farther than it needed to go because it had already worked. That's something that comes up a lot more often than oversharing itself, if that makes sense. Okay, but let's take a look at this haibun, and let me pull this up without a way. I always got to make sure I try not to reveal anybody's like contact info by accident. Okay, so here's the haibun. I think I have to shrink it a little too to make it fit on the screen. Okay. So here's the haibun, and this is a first attempt at a haibun. And if you're unfamiliar with the form, we have a whole haibun issue coming up. I actually just sent it to our proofreaders. It's an amazing issue. First time in a long time we have more poems in the theme section than the open section that precedes it. And there were just that many really, really good, interesting ones. So looking forward to that. But a haibun is traditionally it's journalistic type prose mixed with haiku. But people are pushing it in a lot of fascinating directions, even with verse bun too. You can have other poems that turn into haiku, mixing them all together, combining them in different ways, visual, concrete poems, all sorts of things that are really fascinating. So a really fun form to play with because they have those leaps from, they break up the story with, in a sort of a really like a Zen-like way, like getting whacked with the master's stick when you're sitting for Zen or something. But anyway, a magical first date on closing weekend at Maiden Drive-In. I tell myself it's an accident hurting this man, making him bleed. The cutlass is hot. I'm 16. It's 1989 and drive-in speakers are hardwired, cast metal boxes tethered to poles, sunk 10 inches deep and spaced wide enough to fit a family sedan. We hang the heavy speakers on each lip of window, roll them up. It's barely intermission before they fog up. I'm pushing off my date, yelling, "Stop, stop." We haven't even gotten popcorn yet. He pulls me toward him, I yank back. Each lurch of the cutlass brings thuds of protest from the speaker pressed against its glass. Then a sharp crack, windows shatter, spraying piles of safety-grade diamonds into our laps. That shit goes everywhere. Cold night air rushes in, and with it the corn salt tang of nachos bubbling under a heat lamp. I remember I'm hungry. He sits gravestone still, calls it an omen. I laugh, running my hands through the shards, fingers glittering like stars reflected in the light of the big screen. What will I tell my mother, is all I can think. He turns his narrow eyes to mine. Witch, he calls me, as if saying stop is the problem, a spell that conjures gods to burst small windows, throw hell-bending elbows as hard and unforgiven as the wedding band glinting in his dirty cup holder. He drops me at Taco Bell 6 blocks from my home. I shed a trail of fractured glass the entire length of the road. I tell myself they're sapphires when they crunch under my soles. The next morning I wash what's left of the busted night from my hair. I remember it like a dead twin, being called witch like it's an insult. He wasn't wrong. Witches know the value of real things. They know how to save good when she hangs in the balance, how to transmute damage into lasting talismans. Glass breaks in every direction, and if the cost of a drive-in movie is blood, a witch will provide it. Just know it won't be hers. Crone smiles, old flames in sight. Fires. Yeah. So, as Hemet Mock says, love the story. It's interesting because, well, first off, one of the things that we don't talk about enough, I think, in the Hyben Forum, and Kat Lehman talks about this in a really wonderful way. I think if I remember right, when or maybe it was just somewhere else. She was on the Rattlecast, like Rattlecast number 4 or something. But Lou Watts was talking about this too in the interview we did with the Hyben issue. But having balance within a Hyben is really important too. Like there's sort of a certain amount of weight that the haiku has, and because a haiku is like a little diamond, it has a lot more density and can sort of has more weight to it than prose does. But there's still a sort of balance that has to happen for the thing to feel like a complete whole. And sorry for the light is like just the wrong time of day where the sun's right there, so it has to feel like a complete whole. And I think having this huge, long thing of prose, which is great, compelling story, and then the little haiku at the end, it doesn't feel like it has the balance right. It feels like the haiku is like an afterthought tacked on at the end, and which I guess it is. And so what we would actually want to do in a thing like this is every time, have multiple haiku in this. And there's a lot of examples that we could go through of that. And in the actual original Hyben form, sort of the standard it's become to have one piece of prose and one piece of haiku, and then the title, and then the 3 are kind of in balance like that. But the original Hyben, which Basho wrote, I can't remember what the famous book was, but it's a travel log where he's like talking about going to Kyoto and things like that, and then interspersing in his descriptions of the place and what he did and who he spent time with and all that stuff, he would insert haiku. And so there's just like haiku running through the whole thing. It's not that format. And so having a whole bunch of haiku, I think, would really make this come to life. Now, the question is, without doing that, is it enough of a poem to be a poem? And I think that's a really interesting question. I'm not quite sure. Yeah. I'm not quite sure because the story and the prose really dominates this. And it's actually, it's just so much more toward poetry to prose. Yeah. Sorry, I'm reading some comments. So I think to me it doesn't feel quite poem enough, because in a prose poem it's like there's sort of I think the heart of a prose poem is sort of the irony. Like there's sort of an ironic posture going on, and the voice is playing into that, and that's why it really plays into a lot of absurdity and surrealism in that form. And so you have to have some kind of way that the voice itself is like carrying it in this like small unit to make it really work as a poem, as opposed to, and I guess we should talk about the difference between poetry and prose. And poetry is something that lives in the breath. It's the dance of my tongue and my mouth as I'm forming the shape of the words, and having that be a dance is what poetry is. So it lives in the breath and the body as a dance, and prose lives in the mind is what you're imagining. And it's not like one's better than the other, but one is bodily and one is interior in that mind's eye. And I think and so when you're doing that in the mind's eye in prose thing, you don't want to have the body's kind of a distraction, and it's a whole continuum between the two, but you want to do what you want to do with it. And I think this feels more like a story that's happening in the mind's eye, unless we, add a bunch of Haibun in a balanced way and make it into a really great Haibun. I think that would push the poem even farther. Also, in the interview, Lu Watts says that he can't help but always wanting to add haiku into prose poetry that he reads, and he'll be reading a book of prose poetry, and he'll be like imagining what haiku he would add to it. And I think that does add something. Yeah, Terry Muslim Man says The Narrow Road to the Interior is the Basho book. But yeah, where Haibun sort of popularized. So anyway, my suggestion, I think I would add a bunch of Haibun, or a bunch of haiku, and make this, keep going with this Haibun, because it adds a whole layer, and as many layers as you can have, make the thing come to life. And there's a lot of energy, a lot of great storytelling here. So I think I would go ahead and do that. Okay, let's look at more detail. A magical first date on closing weekend at Maiden Drive-In. So again, a good title. It's really setting the place. We know where we are within it. I tell myself it's an accident hurting this man, making him bleed. The cutlass is hot. I'm 16. It's 1989, and the drive-in speakers are hardwired cast metal boxes tethered to poles sunk 10 inches deep and spaced wide enough to fit a family sedan. It was just great description. We hang the heavy speakers, and then here you could have, and what you want to do is have the haiku some kind of other place that's like cutting against that idea, not just summarizing, not being a concept, but is there anything, what is this? What does this section like remind you of that's not this, and then turn that into a haiku, and we'd have a great like pause there, and then we'd be able to contemplate the beauty of that paragraph even more strongly if we had a cool haiku that sort of spaces it out and adds this like pace to it. We hang the heavy speakers on each lip of window, roll them up. It's barely, I'm getting in the way of my own. There we go. It's barely intermission before they fog up. I'm pushing off my date, yelling, "Stop, stop. We haven't even gotten popcorn yet." He pulls me toward him. I yank back. Each lurch of the cutlass brings thuds of protest from the speaker pressed against the glass. Then a sharp crack. Windows shatter, spraying piles of safety-grade diamonds into our laps. That shit goes everywhere. And then, so now another haiku right there. I mean, how great. Again, it's great description, really good, compelling storytelling. And then you have the Haibun, and it works too if you're familiar with the Braid poems we're talking about, the David Kirby. And I was actually going to bring this up, talking about how to keep storytelling interesting and how to keep it poetry. If you watch Donald Platt, which is the guest tonight or on Sunday night on the Rattlecast, he does this sort of braid technique too, where he's combining stories with these asides and sort of weaving them together. David Kirby does that all the time with his braid poems. I mean, you can read More Than This or whatever from Rattle that combines a bunch of poems together. But you have this like way that the storytelling, each sort of element is heightened by having these breaks and looking at it from a different angle. And that's what Haibun can do. And so imagine, that shit goes everywhere, and then a haiku about something sort of tangentially related to that, about shit going everywhere or something, but not actually that. So we get this undercutting and maybe like a whole second story emerging from the haiku sequence too. And that's really, we're talking about taking, because Jamie's a good poet, we're talking about taking this to like the next level. It's easy to be satisfied with this and say, oh, it's good writing. But we could really take it to the next level by adding haiku between each stanza. And I think that's what I would really suggest. And I also, just having talked to Roberta Beery of Modern Haiku and Rich Yeomans and of Contemporary Haibun Online and Lu Watts, who's Haibun Under at Frog Pond, they all sort of are really looking more for different uses of haiku, not just the title prose haiku, but things that are longer and more developed, that use the haiku interspersed in different ways. That's something to put you right at the top of the slush pile there over at those places. So if you do that, send them to Frog Pond and Modern Haiku and Contemporary Haibun Online. Okay, keep going. But yeah, so put a haiku. Everywhere there's a paragraph like this length, just add a haiku. I think, and it's a lot of work to add all this haiku and think about it, but it'll make a really great poem. Cold night air rushes in, and with it the corn salt tang of nachos bubbling under a heat lamp. See, there's just great descriptions, and we're really like taken there. And I think because we're transported into the scene so well, so clearly, with such concrete images, that's why it's like inviting us to go farther with the haiku interspersed, I think. I remember I'm hungry. He sits gravestone still, calls it an omen. I laugh, running my hands through the shards, fingering glittering like stars reflected in the light of the big screen. I think the glittering like stars isn't as reflecting the light. I think that's a little bit cliche or just sort of trite and simple. You see that a lot, so maybe that doesn't live up to the rest of the descriptions and details. So edit that maybe a little bit. What will I tell my mother is all I can think. And then another haiku of like something about something related but not. He turned his narrow eyes toward mine. Witch, he calls me, as if saying stop. Saying stop is the problem, a spell that conjures gods to bust small windows, throw hell-bending elbows as hard and unforgiven as the wedding band glinting on his dirty cup holder. And that's a really interesting detail that begs a lot of questions that where this could be developed. And I guess the other thing I should say too, which I was thinking as I was reading it, is this could be developed into a longer prose like a novel or a creative nonfiction type piece of writing. And so if you don't want to go the Hyben route, I think expanding this would be interesting too. And so getting more into that and tell this whole story, that's something that's it feels worth telling, and the telling is interesting and compelling. So you could go in that direction too. He drops me at Taco Bell, 6 blocks from my home. I shed a trail of fractured glass the entire length of the road. I tell myself they're sapphires when they crunch under my soles. The next morning, I wash what's left of the busted night from my hair. And I remember thinking, I'm not sure, I was wondering if it could end there, but let's read the next. So think about that as maybe an ending too. I still remember it like a dead twin being called witch, like it's an insult. He wasn't wrong. Witches know the value of real things. They know how to save good when she hangs in the balance, how to transmute damage into lasting talismans. Glass breaks in every direction, and if the cost of a drive-in movie is blood, a witch will provide it. Just know it won't be hers. And so this is a very summarizing, like, at the end of Aesop's Fables, and the moral of the story is blah, blah, blah. It feels like that, and I think this is a cut. And so and maybe how to think of it is to let the haiku tell this part of it. You don't want the haiku to be summarizing. You don't want it to be too close, especially an image to the piece of writing. But to work through these concepts in a series of haiku and then intermingle those in the poem would work for really well. Okay, so I think, anyway, we haven't even talked about the haiku. Crone smiles, old flames in sight, fires. Crone smiles, old flames in sight, fires. So the haiku, it feels like there are sort of 3 breaks in the haiku. And I think, one of the things, to make this a really effective Hyben, you have to put good haiku in. And I like the concept of this haiku. I like the fire and the old flame and the crone, that combination. I like that concept, but I don't think it's combined quite in the right way. Because what you want to have in a haiku is these 2 things that are sort of juxtaposed or intermingled. And I say it's 2 worlds in one breath, but it's like the heart of metaphor. And so you want to have them sort of combined together in a way that they're like overlapping. And that's sort of the way haiku works. And having 3 interposed in there doesn't really work as right. It's like it loses that sort of magic of the haiku. So the crone smiling at the old flames, though, I like that. So I don't know. So work on that haiku. I'm not sure how to. And if you don't read a lot of haiku, I would read a lot of haiku, modern haiku, Frog Pond, etc. A lot of recent back issues are online, just as PDFs if you go to their websites. Focus on those haiku. Yeah. Tom Barlow says, should the haiku be centered on the page? It looks better to me. Yeah. Well, traditionally, we would like indent it a little to just show that it's separate from the text, and every place that you'd indent it a little. There's really no rule about how to format, and you want haiku to be formatted the way that best presents them. Yeah. So I don't know. So we've already gone. It's 47 minutes into the show. Okay, so we won't do a whole. If you haven't yet, let's see, Jamie, listen to the Poetry Space episodes. We did a haiku remake one. It's the show that Katie Dozer does, and I'm co-host. We did a haiku. We did an experimental haibun. And watch those episodes. Listen to those episodes, I should say. Just find the Poetry Space on Spotify or iTunes or whatever. Listen to those. We had some good guests talking about it, and that really helps. Also, the Michael Dylan Welch Rattlecast, because I think it's the haiku is like right there. It's like playing with a structure. Like that's the level of it. Yeah, I think maybe Sharon Ferrante will come up. Sharon's great at like rewriting haiku for people. I'm not so good at it actually. To make it work. I mean, the haiku's like there. It's just like the syntactic structure needs to be played with. And, I've seen what Katie does when she's writing haiku is just iterates a whole bunch. She's got like 8 versions of it until she finds the right one. But yeah, like that haiku is like right there. It's just that the cut here with the dash, the M dash between the crone smiling at the old flames, and then it just being a fire. Like it's the fact that it's like, this is one unit. The crow smiles, old flames in sight. And then fires. Is it saying, I guess, is it firing like a spell? I guess that makes sense. Maybe what it's missing is, I think it's just trying to combine a lot in there. Because the old flame is already like a pun, like a double entendre. And then the fires is too. So that's like a lot of, and then there's a cut. So there's like a whole bunch in this little one. And it's like trying to jam too much in there into a way that doesn't like make the one thing crystallize, So I don't know. I wish I was better at playing with that to make it work. But I think you can come up with a haiku that's really great that's based on this concept. And I think what it means, which I didn't understand quite at first, she's like, there's the fires, but she's like firing, a spell or some kind of like casting a spell with that fires, and so that's a pun too. But I think it's like It didn't have this is like the 80th iteration, and believe it or not, this is the best one. Well, it is interesting, and the other thing you get out of when you have a haibun, there's one haiku. Like that haiku better be damn good. But if you have like a whole bunch of haiku, like one that's sort of interesting but not quite like a hit, is fits better, and it's not as much to worry about, So, what if it was like old flame, and then the cut was there, old flames, the crow smiles and fires. Just to transition that a different way, so the cut was like uniform across the two, and then that. I think I'd go a little bit more in that direction. I like the idea, though. So anyway, we got to move on to some other poems. But thanks, Jamie. These were really, you didn't disappoint. These are really great descriptions, really well-written pieces, and a lot to talk about at a higher level than we usually get to do. So it was really nice pulling this up from just last week. So thanks for sharing that. That was Jamie Thomas, of course, from Ohio. Thank you, Jamie. And now let's do a couple so we can clear out some older submissions in the queue. And let me mark this so Jamie knows, although she's here, so she knows that we talked about her poems. Okay, so let's go back to the oldest poems we've got. Oh, Sharon posted one. Where is it? I'm not sure. I don't see where Sharon posted it. Well, anyway, yeah, work on that haiku a little bit, but I would add a bunch, so that's where I go. Okay, we're going back to August 31st, and on August 31st, Laura Daniel sent us something to look at from New Jersey. Some general questions too. First poem, everyone knows, is what I'm calling a cento backbone, meaning that the first line in each couplet is a cento, a line from a Joseph Fasano poem. The second line in each couplet is a poet's response to the cento, adding meat to the cento's backbone. Oh, that's cool. I like that concept. Together, a new poem and possibly poetry form is created. I like that. Okay. I'd love to hear your thoughts about this poetic creation. I do like to experiment with the form. Okay. And then the second poem is a pantoum, responding to Earth Day, and does it work, and does it flow? Okay, so let's give a look at this cento backbone. Okay, here we go. Everyone knows cento backbone. Every poet needs to free their musical dance. Exciting it is. Everyone knows. My backbone needs straightening, curling. It is how we are torn. It makes no sense. Nonsensical it is. Remember chess. Remember. There is no memory. Foggy it is, and you, just you, my teacher, persist in trying patiently to educate. Learning it is, on my shoulder, and whisper. If you hold the ladder steady, scary it is. The children go first as saplings bow. Pleasure for the merry company. Joyful it is. All you have to do today is play with poetry poetically. Easy it is. Your tired heart doesn't have to make music all night long today. Slowing it is what I am going to become. A tiny poetic dancer spinning words. Creative it is. Yes, it is going to last. Just blow out the strobing candle. Magical it is. Listen, I am sure soon I will be revealed. Wishing it is. Good like that. Lay your hand. Your day's work is complete. Spent it is. Yeah. Tom Barlow says a bit of Yoda speech. And yeah, it's a little bit difficult to read. And I think the poem isn't... I really like the concept of what you're doing with these cento backbones. But I think that there's not enough detail within the... enough substance, a lot of like concrete things within both the what you chose to pull from, and the follow-ups. Like it's not like creating an image, and it's really choppy in the way it's going. And so I think, yeah, as Morgan Fee says, images aren't vivid, concrete enough for me. So I think it could work if we were pulling more, but there's like nothing. I have that feeling of like there's nothing being conjured, like there's no touchstone. Like we talk about that, but there's like got to be something that like you can hold on to know where you are within the poem and what's going on, and that doesn't really work. I think we don't have that, so we're sort of just drifting off in a sort of void, and because it's not enough detailed. You know, Jerry Stevenson says I'm looking for the story, and I think. If you go back to Erin Murphy's second Rattlecast, she talked about, she has a whole book of centos. And let me just look at this, though. She had a Poet Respond poem that was a cento poem. And so look at the line she used. I'm not going to read the whole thing. This is Man with Birds and Bread from this March. And so see how the lines she read have substance. They have a lot of meat to play with. So on the edges of the afternoon, we lie on the beach, gray waves, the only language, the gun-gray curlings of salt tongue. So you get the gun-gray curlings of salt tongue. You know, if you'd picked in the cento a line like that, you know, remember the gun-gray curlings of salt tongue, you'd have so much more to work with, and it would be pulling it up more, pulling the poem forward more. But there just isn't enough concrete substance like that. If you can read the rest of this poem, by Erin Murphy, you know, man slogs through the soft sand with an expired loaf of bread. See, those are detailed, concrete things, and piecing them together like a patchwork. And if you were doing every other line alternating like that with your own lines, I mean, that's great too to weave it through. But it needs to have, you know, enough substance. Like I wonder how much John Ashbery does with centos of his own work, because it feels like he's doing this all the time, like weaving cool images and lines in ways that aren't quite. You know, you have to sort of patch them together. But I could see this form really working, but it has to be more detailed like that, I think, to work. And then the other thing, as someone said, M's dad says it felt too long for the repetition. And it does. It sort of loses its energy that way, too. So I think it's a fun thing to play with, but we should pick more interesting things. That the children go first, the saplings bow. You know, if we did that, and then so that's a good line that has some images in it. But then if I look at pleasure for the merry company, joyful it is. We already have this, like, the repetition of the it is, which gets sort of tedious, but there's nothing that added to the as sapling's bough in the second line. And so if we thought of something as concrete as that for the follow-up, then I think it would work better too. I hope that makes sense. Okay. But it's a cool idea, and so I'd love to see you develop it more. I like it. I like it as a form. Okay, and so this is the Pantoum, Ode to the Earth. It's a poem for Earth Day. And in a Pantoum, I can never remember which way it is. The first and third lines become the second and fourth, or is it the other way around? I guess the second and fourth lines become the first and third of the next stanza. Okay. Ode to Earth. We gather this single April day to praise Earth. We gather to raise environmental consciousness. On the other days, many come to bury Earth. What do climate change deniers celebrate today? We gather to raise environmental consciousness, fight for a clean environment with increasing urgency. What do climate change deniers celebrate today? Because citizens of the world are rising up, fight for a clean environment with an increasing urgency. We gather this single April day to praise Earth. Because citizens of the earth are rising up. On the other days, many come to bury Earth. Well, I think it's nice. This is a good example of what we talked about with Annie Finch in that interview from Rattle 82, was it? About she became the poetry witch, going back to the witches from that first poem. Because she was doing them both at the same time, and the poems that she was using in her witchery weren't good poems. And having like these public poems that you can use for an actual purpose is something we don't think of very often as poets. And I think that works really nice. So that's good. So Rose says the lines could do with more music. Yeah, and Morgan Phoenix says, of course, I agree with the sentiments, but this poem needs to be more show and less tell, I think. Yeah. And that becomes an interesting question, because if you're doing a poem, like say there's an actual event and you want to read, a poem to commemorate it on Earth Day, and you're all showing up and you're at the microphone, this is the kind of poem that you'd want. I mean, even though it's not pushing a concept forward, there's no... it is pushing a concept forward. It's preconceived in its ideology. There's no surprise, so it doesn't work as a poem on that level. But if you, if you're sharing it, if it was a poem that was like a deeply surprised thing that you learned from, then it wouldn't work in that public setting. So it's always something tricky to play with. And even critiquing a poem like this, it's hard to say, because this poem would go off better than a poem that was more complicated in the setting that this is sort of intended for, potentially. So anyway, we gather this single April day to praise Earth. We gather to raise environmental consciousness. On the other days, many come to bury Earth. What do climate change deniers celebrate today? So that's nice use of the lines so far. Yeah. So I'm just reading some of the comments. Anyway. Yeah, so Dick Westheimer says, I disagree, Tim. Showing up poems to be more memorable benefit from strong images, and compelling metaphors. Yeah, I mean, it is true. I mean, I'm not saying that. But, well, I don't know. I mean, it's just something that I struggle with personally myself. Because the kind of poems that we and most of us love, the general public does not. because we love experiencing cognitive dissonance and learning from that and complexifying the world and I just don't think, and it's an argument we have, I have it with Dick Westheimer sometimes, have it with Katie sometimes. I just don't think the majority, I think it's like some people don't have a sense of humor. Some people don't have the sense of wanting to do that. And when you get people in a crowd, they want to have their thoughts confirmed. And as simply as possible. And I don't really know what to make of that. I feel like it's doing a different thing. It's not like really poetry. It's like rhetoric or something, but Anyway, yeah, but we should try to talk about the poem. So Dick does say though that they benefit from stronger images and more compelling metaphors, and so where can we do with that? Like, where can we put metaphor in here? If you want to talk about how to add that, I think that would even with this mission, then we would have a stronger poem. So I guess I agree with that aspect of it. Yeah, as Morgan Feeney says, you can have your thoughts confirmed with good imagery, though. Yeah, and so how can we add some imagery and metaphor and make the subject come to life a little bit more? We gather the single April day to praise Earth. We gather to raise environmental consciousness. On the other days, many come to bury Earth. So instead of saying, why do climate change deniers celebrate it, can you describe the burying Earth in a concrete, descriptive way? I mean, that's an opportunity to, bury Earth under the blah, 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 or like make that a real image. And so I think that's the direction to strengthen the poem a little bit. Yeah. Audrey Friedman says, dissect line by line. Each must be memorable. Yeah, I think that's a great target too. I don't know. Okay, I think that's what. So spice these up. I think we should move on to another poet. Thanks for sharing these. Again, that was Laura Daniels. PMB says, bury the earth in Christmas toys. Yeah, I mean, that would be vivid. Yeah. Hillary Steele says, we're not above a bit of political poetry at an open mic. I think the praising of the earth and the stark against deniers may belong in different poems. I wouldn't put them next to each other. Oh, that's a good idea. That's a good concept, too. I don't know. I mean, I'm really... I'm struggling with what to say about the poem because, it's just not something that I, care about as poetry. To do that, I think poetry is interesting when it explores and complexifies things, and so yeah. Rosenauer says to raise environmental consciousness is dry. I talk about love, delight, intoxication. Yeah, and Terry Meslick McMahon says the sixth line starts to lose me a little preachy. I really enjoyed the first quatrain. Yeah, okay. Well, we're gonna move on though. And let's go next to, hang on one second. I'm losing my train of thought. Okay. Let's go to the next poet. We'll do one more. This is Wilson Dong from Ho Chi Minh City. No questions, just this poem. Is it one? No, there's two. There's a short one and then a longer one. Here we go. We sing our bodies much electric. When April with its sweet showers has pierced the vacant lots, though the heat still blazing like unceasing fire, you and I, young and willful, jog around the crumbles like no divide. Heard the laughing and the kicking, yes, that we are no mind thinking, 'cause today is today, and morrow is not a subject that we children savvy. We sing our bodies much electric, liquid guests of our rags. Let's find some forgotten cold, then plunge into the splash of brightness. Then I saw your strawberry lips reddening under the cloudy day. What if you and I hold hands and pray that our day would be eternal? So I kiss you on your soft cheek. Oh, don't you know you are that soft, soft as a little hamster, just to think you are my life, my deeply sweet April. Okay, so... so there's the Whitman reference. There's some strange things in the poem. As Shape of Soup says, this lacks voice. It feels in a way. I wonder if it's a translation from the original, but it doesn't feel consistent in the way that it's using language. So I'm not sure. When April with its sweet showers has pierced the vacant lots. And then why a period at the end of, a period at the end of each line almost. Interesting. Jamie Papa says the Walt Whitman connection I found in Vietnam quite a bit when I was there. That's interesting. And Morgan Fee says a lot of illusions. I'm not sure I'm picking up on them all. The language confuses me in places. And Rose Leonard says, I like the looseness of the language, but it is inconsistent. Yeah. And as Nancy, I think, English as a second language might be a barrier. Yeah. Okay. So let's read a little bit more. Through the heat, still blazing like unceasing fire. And so these are sentence fragments that I'm not sure why. You and I, young and willful, jog around the crumbles like no divide. Jog around the crumbles like no divide. I think, heard the laughing and the kicking, yes, that we are no mind to thinking. I don't know. I think it's sort of just the language is muddled. Well, we'll say for this, imagine a person actually speaking the poem to somebody. And that's just a great key to developing a voice. I think the idea, it was, who was it? Shape of Soup says this lacks voice. That's really the problem here, is that you can't get into the poem because it's inconsistent in the way, and who's speaking. I don't know who's talking to me or why, because it's not consistent in the use of speech. Yeah. Let's look at the other one really quick. The Maid from the Northeast. I know neither a day or hour I bowed under the tome of words. I've learned under timid glow. I've cried for my mother. She knew that I'd be the guardian. She knew I'd service God. So it's the Maid from Northeast. Yeah. And I feel it's sort of the same way for this. We're not really let into the story, even though the story is being told to us. The Maid from the Northeast. I know neither a day or hour. What is that like tied to? I bowed under this tome of words. I've learned under timid glow. I've cried for my mother. She knew that I'd be the guardian. She knew I'd service God. I just don't know where to go with that. Like, it's sort of general. It's generally told, and yet specifically, like the details are specific, and yet there's no way to connect them together. So I think we need to get more of the story here. Yeah. And then Morgan Fee says, is that meant to be serve God or service God? I feel like there are very different meanings there. Yeah, I'm just not sure how to pick up. Sharing French is not enough story. Yeah, we're just not really let into these poems. And part of it might be the diction, word choice, because it's being translated. In the first poem we had, there's all the allusions to English language poetry, and there are a whole bunch of them. But we have some strange word choices that make it, a subject that we children savvy, up here. I'm not sure what that's trying to say, but it feels like it's like a mistranslation. Yeah. So anyway. Yeah. So I think I'm not sure how to comment on this one either. So let's move on. We'll do one more. Okay. So there's that. So that's our reaction to that anyway as a group. And if anybody has any more comments about that, feel free to leave them. And the poet, Wilson Dung, can learn from what you think. We'll do one more. This is Ode to Olivia. And this is Vanshika Chaudhary from Jaipur. I think Jaipur is India, right? Yeah. Okay. So here's this poem, Ode to Olivia. And then we'll close up the show with this one. Ode to Olivia. We'll go see... Oops, sorry. You got to see it too. Ode to Olivia. We'll go see the midnight circus today. I've parched myself with sunrise soliloquies. I tremble across a tightrope of my condensed sweat to your reddening doorway. A chaotic crimson evening wanes, and the docile black pepper night isn't cold. Yet you thread your breezy fingers in my flaky palms. We're late to the circus, but we take inconsequential steps, just talking typically, as if the contortion of my lungs was an elephant in the room. Restless bells shepherd us to our destined carnival of comedic convulsions. It's empty except for me and you. I orbit around you as we forage for the most flattering view, our makeshift self-portraits. You slurp sophisticated strawberry soda, brilliant as my blush, as I eclipse my admiration and mint-blanketed coffee breath. We exchange golden brown caramelized affection through shared popcorn, and I mindlessly criticized listless lilac-smeared lions with uncultivated manes, but Olivia, I was merely cherishing your frolicking, dainty dandelion hair and bolognese blood nails and captivating crooked lips and wispy, wistful dreams and obnoxiously oblivious sins and learning your language verbatim, or slipping thistledown notes into your color-coordinated archives of fading doodles was not enough. You hummed into the melody of my nighttime ballad of acidic, acrobatic teardrops and swayed to the confetti-free cannons of our apocalypse. And my ear-splitting eyes scream honeydew-infused love, but all you hear is the cacophony of the clown's horn. To think I thought you were the ringmaster of my head, but to you I was just a gesture in the audience. And when did your elderberry eyes morph into a sickening seafoam green? And though I fancied you as my trapeze, I curled up on a safety net without ever asking you out, and the melancholy traveling circus moved on as well. Yeah. So, yeah. So as people are pointing out, too many adjectives, adjective abuse, and adjectives are the weakest form of word, besides for articles and stuff. But articles actually are kind of more important. I think this poem has one really interesting. I think the poem sort of takes off when we get that aside. Where is it? Olivia, yeah, here. But Olivia, I'm merely cherishing your frolicking, and see how the poem the lines suddenly get very short, and I think there's a nice and because the images are sort of separated. There's a nice way that we can sort of enjoy them a little bit more than the other sections. And I think the poem kind of takes off. And I was hoping, there's something I like about the poem. Yeah. So Amy Dower Solar says, I do like a lush poem of excess, but trimming down the adjectives might make the poet's best choices stand out. Yeah. And Jamie Papa says he needed a good ending to put a stop to all that blather, and I thought it was. Yeah, I think so too. So the poem is there's a really good poem buried in here, I think, which is fascinating. So Ode to Olivia. And I think there's a way that you want to sort of be distracted a little bit and sort of forget that it's talking to Olivia. And then when that Olivia comes in and we get the actual thing and then it didn't actually ask Olivia out, I think that really works. There's a nice arc, a nice progression to the poem in the way the story unfolds. And so I think maybe just trimming the first section back and trying to gather the energy that you sort of capture, we exchange, and I think this is where it's great. We exchanged, where does it start being good? And I wonder if maybe we could just start the poem like here. Or maybe like lean a little bit. We'll go to see the circus. What if we did this? Ode to Olivia. We'll go to see the midnight circus today. I've parched myself with sun. No, not that. We'll go to see the circus today. You'll slurp sophisticated strawberry soda, brilliant as my blush as I eclipse my admiration. And we'll do it in the future tense too. I'll eclipse my admiration and mint-blanketed coffee breath. We exchange golden brown caramelized affection through shared popcorn, and I mindlessly criticize listless lilac-smeared lions with uncultivated manes. See how I think that these are fun. I think the descriptions here end up becoming fun as you get into the rhythm of it, where it's, I think, coming out a little more spontaneously. You can sort of feel the fun that the writer is having with the writing. And I think that's where the poem comes alive. So, listless lilac-smeared lions with uncultivated manes, but Olivia, I was merely cherishing your frolicking, dainty dandelion hair and bolognese blood nails, and captivating. I would keep the line breaks going so they're short. Captivatingly crooked lips and wispy, wistful daydreams and obnoxiously oblivious sins, and learning your language verbatim and slipping thistledown. So I love it. Like it just gets carried away with itself. It's really fun. Slipping thistledown notes into your color-coordinated archives of fading doodles. Now, without the short line breaks, though, it sort of gets clogged up again. But there's a really nice rhythm and stuff going on here. Yeah, Shape of Soup says, I feel like being bombarded with water balloons. And I think that's nice. And so I think what we have is like sort of a spinning our wheels sense. I think maybe, and a lot of times you're trying to get into the rhythm of the dance of the language that you're speaking. And I think sometimes we take a false turn, and I think this didn't have the music. I've parched myself with sunrise soliloquies. I think we love the concept of sunrise soliloquies, but then the language got bogged down in that, and it didn't really pick up again until later. And so this whole thing was sort of just spinning its wheels, not really taking off yet. But then once we jump into the poem, it's kind of fun. And if we space this section out so we can enjoy it a little more, there was a really great rhythm. And then it comes to the end. I'm not going to read the whole thing again, but I thought you were the ringmaster of my head. But to you, I was just a jester in the audience. It's fun. And when did your elderberry eyes morph? Like elderberry eyes, that's really cool, actually. Morph into a sickening seafoam green. And though I fancied you as my trapeze, I curled up in a safety net without ever asking you out. And the melancholy traveling circus moved on as well. And so I love that after the whole, like after this whole just like menagerie of like adjective and description getting carried away with itself, it didn't even happen anyway. And I curled up on a safety net without even asking you out. So this didn't even happen. The traveling circus moved on too. I like that. So I think there's a good poem buried in here. I think, write it more out, and it's the kind of poem that wants to be wild and free and playful. And so cut out the stuff that's not doing that, and we can hear it sort of not being as engaging. Jump in from early on to this spot and then keep it with this sort of pacing, and then you'll have this sort of messy, fun poem that I think is really good to read. I like that too. So this just some little editing, and this is a nice poem. So thanks for sharing this. And it's Ode to Olivia. Is that, I don't make you dizzy. It's the only poem there, right? Yep. Okay. It's Ode to Olivia. Thanks for sharing that. That was, Vanshika Chadhari from India. Thanks for sharing that one. That's going to wrap up the critique of the week for today. Thanks everybody for joining and participating. It's been a lot of fun. Let's see, make sure I label this so we can let them know that we were here. All right. So, so it's January 15th or 10th. That means we only have 5 days left to get your manuscripts in for the Rattle Chapbook Prize. Got 3 winners coming up. So make sure you do that. There's the last weekend before the Chapbook Prize deadline. And in a note, again, the deadline is tied to midnight Eastern time. We switched to Eastern time because it gets confusing on Submittable. It makes it look like for a lot of people that it's January 16th is the deadline. No, it's January 15th at midnight, but Eastern time now. And the guest on the Rattlecast this weekend coming up, we're going to have a lot of fun. We already mentioned him in this episode. Donald Platt is the guest. We published several of his poems in Rattle. He writes these really David Kirby-like poems. The Braids, they're a wonderful poet, and I like it when there's a poet that I appreciate their poetry, but I don't really know much about. So Donald is a professor at a college in Ohio, and he writes great books and great poems. These long stories that have a lot of twists and turns in them. They're really fun to read. Swansdown is his most recent book. We're going to talk to him. That's this Sunday, January 12th. The prompt for this week was to, and again, I want to get the wording right, so hang on with me. It's not about being overfilled. But the wording is always important. Or usually, or maybe not. I don't know. Write a poem in which something is overfilled. Include as many tactile details as possible. So that is your prompt for this week. The guest is Donald Platt. Hope to see you then. It's January 12th. The regular time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Hope to see you there. Hope you have a great weekend. In the meantime, we'll talk to you later. Goodbye.